Welcome back. How have you been? I don't really care, this is just a video. Anyway, here's where I left you in the last episode. Now what you might remember is I was trying to make something to replace these very excessive engine mounts. They've got all these complicated contours that have to be pretty exact in order to go around components. And they're not the same on both sides. This one's got a different contour here than it does to there. This is to allow for clearance from the air conditioning compressor and the power steering pump. And this one is to allow for a little cable relief, and then this side is to go around the starter motor. In the last episode, I made a little bracket that would fit on the engine mount with the correct spacings and clear all the things that were required. What I then needed to do is to find a way to move this mounting hole here further back towards the engine. So here are the engine mounts that I'm using. And in order to make the most of the space I've got here, I'm going to have to weld this bolt with the engine mount attached to it directly to the bracket. Now obviously this is less than ideal. However, I need to do things like this in order to save space on the build. Not really. Here's what I actually did. I've obviously had to make one of these for each side with its corresponding bracket. And this is a very rough example of what I've come up with. What it's done is move this poly bush closer to the engine as well as lifting it up, which gives me the best clearance possible. Now in this case, obviously it's going to need a bit of re-welding and a bit of tidying up, and I'm going to be bridging it across here for some extra strength, but the poly bush in the middle being bolted through it is going to account for a lot of the strength anyway. The other side was this one, which has the obscure cable thing and the starter motor cut out. It's slightly more beautiful and contoured. Obviously this is still not completely finished, some bits need re-welding, but this is generally finished in terms of design. On the chassis, what I've done is make little brackets to cope with the bushing. Again, these are just tacked in place, this isn't finally welded in. And what will happen is these other engine mounts will slot over the top of here, and a bolt will go through the middle. Now what you probably can't tell from watching the videos is that these holes here are about 10.5 millimeters, and the ones that I've done on my brackets are about 10 millimeters. Now what this means is that I've had to be extremely precise with how I've welded all this stuff together. And that's why I didn't really bother videoing it, because that sort of thing would double the amount of time that it takes, and I'd probably make a mistake. But at least it would be on camera if I did. But I didn't. Anyway, all that means is that these holes are extremely precise, and I'm quite happy with that. It also means that whatever abuse this engine mount puts up with, it's not going to shift and rotate around, and I can safely say that it fits better than the original mount did.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that.
And that's about all I'm going to do for engine mounts for now. Each one is held on by about 8 tack welds, and as you can see, it's supporting the whole engine. So I have no doubts that it's going to be plenty strong enough once it's all welded up properly. But that's only 2/3 of the puzzle. Here's what we're doing today. Gearbox mounts. Now what I've been doing as I've been taking the body on and off to take my measurements for the engine mounts and stuff, I've been shimming the gearbox using very precise measures. In this case, I've been using the industrial standard Jim weights and square hollow section. And funnily enough, this has gone surprisingly well. For those of you doing this at home, mathematically, 7.5 kilograms of Jim weights plus 50mm square hollow section equals the correct height for this gearbox. And what I've decided to do is utilize the original TB42 gearbox mounts. Firstly, because they're going to be better than I could design myself. Plus it means if they do need replacing, it's very easy to buy them off the shelf quite cheaply. It also means that I can use the existing chassis mount, and all I have to do is design something that fits in these original mounting holes. There's also another thing that I found, which is quite cool. Now this is the original Touareg gearbox mount, and that goes on to these 4 holes here. And like most car manufacturers, they use the same gearbox in different cars, which means they have various other bolts knocking around. So as you can see, these are too far back to be useful. And if I hold it with my other hand, you can actually see that. You see the gearbox doesn't line up with the crossmember. That means that I need to make use of these 4 holes further up. So what do the engineers at Volkswagen do? Well, it turns out that if I take this bracket and just move it forward so it's perfectly aligned, it'll match up with the same bolt holes. Now this on its own isn't particularly exciting, but the good thing is, instead of sticking my head under a precariously placed gearbox trying to take measurements, I can simply take off this and take these measurements and put them into CAD so I can cut out my gearbox mount. Delightful. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, is my to-be gearbox mount. Now the reason I've chosen this design, as you can see I've got the original gearbox mounts here. This is the original gearbox mount. In this orientation, you can see the holes there are the ones on top of this plate. It means that if for any reason I need to adjust the height of the gearbox mount, I can simply cut out another one of this component and stack them on top like a shim. Now obviously this was just a rough SketchUp. The only thing that's accurate is this top plate, so I'm going to have to put the patrol mounts back on the crossmember and then get my measurements so I can tweak this plate and get my angles right. Because obviously using gym weights and square hollow section is not the best thing in the world. So, heavy metal flamey machinery montage.
Cause we want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution. Yeah, we ran out of patience. Boil up with the cold hard hatred. I can feel the vibration. Feet in the streets, it's a new sensation. I wanna break faces on the pavement. I wanna make greatness look complacent. Adrenaline awakened, I can taste it.
So with any luck, this is the thing that's going to hold my gearbox in. You can see that it doesn't quite look exactly like the CAD, because naturally my gearbox is coming down at a slight angle like that. So what this means is rather than taking 100 measurements and trial and erroring it, all I've done is tack it in the position that the gearbox wants to sit. And then what I can do is I can weld everything up, pray that it doesn't warp, and then grind it back so that everything looks nice. So that's what I'm going to do. Right now. Now, as I'm sure you can see, this is not the prettiest thing in the world. However, if it fits, it'll be worth tidying up a little bit and making permanent. Now, what you may or may not have noticed is that I could have done a lot more welding on this. However, I ran into a small roadblock. Got no gas. And while I would love to continue, I would rather not have to clean up porous welds. Anyway, at the moment it's plenty strong enough to support the gearbox, so I'm going to test fit it. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is the engine mounted, aside from a little bit of welding. But we're not going to talk about that. Now, from what I can gather, the position is absolutely perfect, as well as the height. I think I'm getting quite good at this making stuff thing. Anyway, I'm not sure how much content I've made at this point, so I can either end the video here, or do something else. But as it would happen, in post-production, I've realised I could add more to this episode. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start ripping things out of the engine bay in this. Now, as I'm sure we're aware, there's a load of unwanted crap in this engine bay. For example, radiators, header tanks, battery holder, second battery holder. And seeing as I've got a lot of horrible things to fit, like 2 air boxes and a load of ECU carrying stuff over the top, I need the emptiest engine bay I can possibly think of. So just for now, anything that can be unbolted, I'm going to unbolt. And then we can save the lovely cutting things out, like that battery box, for the next episode. Let's have a short interim to add some rage to the comments from patrol owners. Why do people put these things in their cars? They're absolute trash. If you're putting it in because your car's overheating, then your car has a problem that's causing it to overheat. Solving an overheating problem by adding more airflow is not the answer. Moving on. So I think that's all we have time for today. I now have a significantly less full engine bay, as well as a car with an engine mounted without an engine bay. Now, stripping all this stuff took me all of 5 minutes to do, and what it means is I'll have considerably more space to work with when it comes to putting this body on for the semi-final time. Now, the plan for this project build is similar to Project Binky, but obviously not as good. I'm going to put everything together, get it running, then hopefully get it engineered, and once it's at that stage, everything will be stripped apart, finished properly, and then made to look pretty. And this is how I justify keeping this body looking as crap as it does. Now, the body, as it happens, is extremely straight. Don't crucify me, LBGQIRS. But unfortunately, the rear windows were extremely bad. Now, while the body side of this is perfect, I've had to remove them and pretty much throw them away. And it turns out it's quite hard to get hold of good replacements, so any of those in the comments below. Now, aside from that, there are a few things that I'm going to do with the interior. Now, seeing as I'm pillaging the Touareg corpse, it's an extremely fancy car, especially by my standards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the center console and gear change and put that in the Patrol, and then I'm going to make some kind of weird amalgamation of Patrol and Touareg dash, which is probably sacking off all the SRS and airbag stuff, maybe the steering wheel too, and taking all the electronics, like the things that are hidden under there on both sides, and somehow shoehorning all the controls into the Patrol dash. But all that is extremely in the future things that I probably shouldn't worry about for now. More pressing matters include getting the engine running. Because it doesn't. Anyway, press that, goodbye.